Hey guys, it's Matt. Recording over the sound in my backyard as I did this, it was just from the handheld old Canon. It didn't come out real well. But the point of this is, you can disprove evolution or Darwin's theory of anything, Darwin's theory of snow cones. You can disprove it all in your backyard, on your leisure time, between bites of a cheesesteak. It's so simple. So typically the sort of things we talk about, I'm gonna leave that to a minimum because this is something you could present to your roommate. Just get your roommate thinking about things a little bit differently, and if they think about this a little bit differently, they might think about other things a little bit differently. By the way, if there's any palm readers out there that are interested, go for it. Go for it. This is a red maple seed. I'm going to look at 3 tree seeds that are coming down or come down behind my house in May. This is red maple. I don't have much sugar maple or Norway maple here. And the red maple, the Norway maple would be the same helicopter, but much smaller. The point is, this thing miraculously makes a perfect helicopter when you drop it, the likes of which Da Vinci himself couldn't reproduce. The recording here of what happens doesn't look that impressive, but it's very impressive when you're here. It's a perfect helicopter. I don't know why it doesn't look as good here as it does in person. It creates a perfect it doesn't look like a perfect helicopter, but I don't know why it's not the same as when I dropped it. But it's a perfect helicopter. Of course, the idea is so the seed falls away from the tree, carries away. Even one that's damaged, has the same action. It's almost just as effective. It's a big hole in this one. Okay, we looked at red maple. Let's look at 2 other types. This, I believe, is poplar, or tulip poplar, also called yellow poplar. Now, it also makes a helicopter, but the helicopter isn't nearly as effective as maple helicopters, but it looks completely different, of course. Now, this is another way a tree propagates itself. I think this is oak. White oak, maybe? It's not chestnut oak because oaks have acorns, I know, and I still think this is a type of oak. It doesn't really matter for our purposes here if I'm getting the tree exactly right. 3 completely different ways to propagate. And this stuff just clumps up, huge clumps of it, like tumbleweed all around the house. When you break it apart, it's like thousands and thousands of little seeds. 3 completely different ways to reproduce. Okay, number 1, the red maple helicopter. Number 2, the poplar helicopter also, but not nearly as effective. And what I'm going to call oak. Again, thousands of seeds. It doesn't matter, the tree. Okay, now these ridiculous theories about evolution break down on their own. You don't even need to go through these examples. But let's start from the basics. You never know what Atlantic Magazine subscriber might come across this video. 2 parts to Darwin's whole evolutionary presentation. Let's give him the respect he deserves. 1 is a natural selection, okay, which is very real in my opinion. It makes sense. When the drought hit Africa back now thousands of years ago, the giraffes that had the longer necks that were able to reach up higher into the trees to get food were the only ones that survived. So the giraffes with the longer necks reproduced, and the ones with the shorter necks didn't get a chance to reproduce. Just like if getting food in the society was based on basketball, for example, everybody would eventually over time start to look like Shaquille O'Neal. That certain people would be able to reproduce based on how food is gotten. I would get out there and he'd be able to dunk on me. I wouldn't be able to get the food. That's basically how society works here anyway. But you understand what I'm saying. So this makes perfect sense. Natural selection. But the other part of it is just basic, for lack of a better word, evolution. A monkey that swings from a tree became something like a Neanderthal man, became something like Homo erectus, and became you. But there's not one shred of evidence that sort of evolution, which is most of what Darwin's based on, exists. No creature has ever been born different than what its parent was. We've talked about this before, but let me repeat it. Nothing has ever been born that's been different what its parent was. So Seabiscuit, maybe it was a man, it doesn't matter. If Seabiscuit had a calf, if that's even right, nobody went in and say, what is it? Oh, it's another horse? That wouldn't surprise anybody. It's not going to give birth to little bunny rabbit, Seabiscuit. It's always the same as its parent. That's number one. But there also is zero evidence recorded throughout all of scientific history that something was born something. It was born a little bunny rabbit, but by the time it died, it became something else. Zero. Science, you could go look through all the Darwin books you want. There ain't no incidents of that ever happening. So Darwin has zero squat. You don't want to stare at a giraffe all day. These are my recent videos of Valley Forge Park and the Arch of Valley Forge, very similar to the Arch of Titus, the Arc de Triomphe, the New York Arch. These are just odes to themselves, of course, but we'll do this some other time. But didn't want to bring in all these different examples like giraffe. The idea was to just disprove Darwin with 3 seeds in my backyard. That's all it takes. 3 seeds in your backyard. So just the maple. Let's start with the maple. How does it produce a perfect helicopter? How would evolution ever occur there where it would over time create a perfect helicopter? The first problem is, how does it get the feedback? How does the tree itself get the feedback? Again, you'd say, well, millions and millions of years ago, Matt, it wasn't a perfect helicopter, the seed, and it flew 50 feet away downwind. It was something else. Well, how would the tree ever get the feedback to evolve it into a perfect helicopter? Okay, the tree itself wouldn't even be aware if the seeds took. All right, and overall, it's better for a species to spread out. But the point here is, why would evolve into a perfect helicopter that carries the wind? If the wind is right, it's like a song. If the wind is right, you can sail away, find infinity. Will go 40, 50 feet away from the initial tree. Now that's preferable to propagating a species, but it's not necessary. And the tree itself, the point is, the tree itself would never know, because it would never know. But Matt, why would the ones that traveled farther away have a better chance of germinating than the ones that just dropped a little closer? What gives it away, guys, is the perfection of the seed. That if you designed it on a CAD, it wouldn't be much different than this. It's perfect to become a perfect helicopter. The point is, if anything about the whole Darwin story was real, yes, someone might be screaming at me saying, Matt, seeds do need to move away from the tree. But then the seed itself, if evolution were real, would have evolved into something that was good enough to get just far enough away from the tree, 10, 15, 20 feet. And then the evolution would have stopped. See, because the propagation of the species would have been adequate. It wouldn't need to evolve into a perfect helicopter that Da Vinci couldn't reproduce. It's perfect. I agree the poplar one is not, but the maples are. See, it would evolve into something that was just like a little demented, little retarded wing that was able to just in the wind get 20 feet away. It wouldn't have, and then it would have been good enough to propagate the species. And then the evolution would have stopped. It wouldn't have gone into this perfection. Do you understand? The poplar seed is not as good of a helicopter. It makes the helicopter action, but it's not nearly as perfect like the maple. But somebody would argue and say, well, the poplar tree is much, much taller. It's dropping from sometimes 70 to 80 to 90 feet. It doesn't have to be a perfect helicopter because of the height. That is very interesting. Now, the smaller one needs to be more perfect to get farther away from the tree. The point is, how do it do that? How do it know? All right, the people that would defend Darwin here with the Darwin posters up on the ceiling along with Elon Musk posters would talk about natural selection. Well, Matt, the trees that were able to reproduce seeds that were able to travel farther away, they were able to reproduce the species where the other ones died out. There'd be no other way for a fan of Darwin to explain this away. But I would say, why? Why is that such it sounds like such a given, like that would have to be a given. Why does it have to be a given? That the seeds that were able to travel the absolute farthest distance away would be better at propagating the species. And again, even if that's true, even if I can't argue against that, why would it develop into perfection in the maple helicopter? Why wouldn't it just develop into what's adequate? Okay? The maple perfect helicopter gives Darwin away much more than the oak and much more than the poplar, in my opinion. But why is it such a given that if they travel, the ones that travel the absolute farthest would be better at propagating the species? Why? Because we know where the mother tree is. We know there's good soil. We know there's good light. Where the mother tree wouldn't exist. We know it's pretty good where the mother tree is. It might be close to a brook or pond. So maybe it would be better for the seed to be just good enough to go 15 or 20 feet away. Then it would still have access to the same water, the same good soil. If it was able to make itself a perfect helicopter and travel hundreds of feet away, it might land in a pool of oil. I mean, it's not a given that the environment 100 or 200 feet away is better for survival. Of course, it's better to propagate a tree if you are a godlike being and you want a tree to go all up and down a huge continent as quickly as possible. It's better if these things fly like the wind. It's better if birds eat them and poop them out miles away. But why is that a given that that's better for the survival of the species? It's not a given. But the Darwin people would tell you it's a given. What's up, Boots? Here's another problem. Why the humongous variation just amongst trees, all in the same place, all in Pennsylvania? 1,000s of little light seeds to carry on the wind. One creates a perfect helicopter. One's not so perfect of a helicopter, but maybe it falls from a higher distance. How do you account for such tremendous variation? See, it was all about natural selection. And that's all the Darwin people would have is, well, Matt, the seeds that are able to move the farthest away, they would be better for the survival of the species. Well, why? There's no, even that statement, you can't really back that up. But let's just say that as a given. Well, if that was a given and that's all they would have in their defense, then trees would over time start to do the same thing, right? The trees that could make the perfect helicopter, if this was so necessary for survival, trees today, that all would be left are the ones that make the perfect helicopter that could carry on the wind, if moving away with such perfection from the original mother tree is so important. See, if it was natural selection, all the trees would start doing what's best. They would all start kind of doing the same thing. But you have ridiculous variation just in somebody's backyard, let alone continent by continent. Darwin, you don't hold up, buddy. Now, Pam, who I know, has been to the Galapagos Islands, and the Galapagos Islands, per this system, has been linked to Darwin. I don't care if he really went down there or not. That's not the point. He probably did really go down there. Got naked in a little pool somewhere, blows blue bubbles. I don't care what he did. It's not the point. Point is, of all the trinkets, Pam brings the trinket back, little magnet or something, or sticker and a magnet for the fridge, and there's the Galapagos turtle, Galapagos Darwin. They're linking, they just love, the system loves to link Darwin with the Galapagos because there are some incredible species on Galapagos, all right? And I'm not saying that these species didn't evolve. I'm saying it's not what Darwin is presenting. I'm saying I'm not going to get too conspiratorial. I don't know who's going to be listening to this. There are other things that may exist in this reality outside your little box that they told you in school. I know not my typical, people that listen to this, but others that may be coming across it. Did you realize there are actually possibilities in this world that don't go into the little tiny box that your 9th grade science teacher gave you? Are you aware of that? So there could have been an evolution, but not in this way. There's a lot of possibilities if you're able to step out of your little box. But I don't want to get too conspiratorial. So once you go down these paths, then you're labeled some sort of lunatic. Anyway, so the system loves to link Darwin with the Galapagos. And, again, think of it. The Galapagos is technically Ecuador. And, they're down there pushing an English naturalist. Why? Does that... people like, Matt, just get too conspiratorial. Who's going to be listening to this? I agree. It's just obvious, all part of the one world system. Ecuador wouldn't give a shit about an English nationalist. Somebody might say, Matt, it's important to their tourism trade to link Darwin to well, maybe. I don't think, is anybody not going to, well, okay, maybe. I hear you. All right. I hear you. But it's just unnatural. I'm saying the incredible linkage with Darwin to the Galapagos. One almost can't be mentioned without the other anymore in a single sentence. It's unnatural. It's over the top. It's too much. If one little English naturalist went down there for a few weeks and he sat in a pool naked and afraid, it wouldn't be the biggest, he wouldn't be forever linked to it. It's unnatural, this presentation. I don't care how conspiratorial it sounds to anybody stumbling upon this video. That's how the system works, to get people to believe in a bunch of bullshit. Sorry anybody new. I don't have another 500 hours to explain how this shit works. Stay tuned. Okay, this is the famous Galapagos scenes from the movie Master and Commander. Master Bader and Commander, Russell Crowe, roughly, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. It's amazing, some of these movies that seem new to us. Like, that was made 15 years ago. What? But they make a big part of the movie. It's got to be close to 15 minutes, is this whole Galapagos scene and letting the doctor off and his assistant and rounding up the unique species. Master and Commander, the greatest joke ever presented in movie history, the lesser of two weevils. Is that the situation we're in right now? The lesser of two weevils. But the point, guys, is narrative. It doesn't matter. Well, let me go right to the basics first, and then we'll ponder how this happened. Just when something's getting a little bit maybe stale or it's not fresh in the minds of the next generation, anybody my age, 45, 50, older, absolutely very familiar with the whole Darwin concept tied to the Galapagos, the original species from the Galapagos. But, again, here we go again, 35 or under, you've heard of the Galapagos, but you're not as familiar with it. So it's time to recreate the narrative in a major motion picture via this whole Galapagos scene. And do they mention Darwin here? Maybe in the movie. It doesn't really matter because it's bringing this whole naturalism, examine the evolution of the species. The whole concept, Darwin concept, is kind of refreshed in this movie. And it doesn't mean that the director, producer of the movie got a certain set of instructions from the Illuminati window that originated from the Chernobyl control center. It's just how the reality works. Nobody's in on it half the time or most of the time. It's just the reality itself needs this whole Galapagos, Darwin, natural selection, evolution, exactly what was taught in school. It needs it to carry through time. And it will use its movies and its media like this to refresh the idea or refresh the concept into the minds of, hundreds of millions of people saw this movie. Since it's been this long, probably close to 1 billion people in the world have seen this movie, in the past 15 years, rented it at some point. So this is how the reality itself does business. It wants us to understand the mechanism. Well, how is that done, Matt? Who gave the director orders to do this? And I understand what you're saying, why this Darwin theme is kind of refreshed in this movie. It doesn't. We're done trying to figure out how it's done because we've seen too many cases like this. What's popping in my head is I guess it was the one where they returned to San Francisco, Star Trek with Kirk, number 2, or 2 is Khan. Everybody knows that. 3 or 4. Voyage Home or whatever with the whales. I think that was the one where of all the songs to singing around the campfire, probably should show you some different pictures here. Of all the songs singing around the campfire, they decide Spock, Bones, and Captain Kirk sing "Row, row, row your boat." I mean, reality itself. You've heard me, if you've been here a while, heard me talk about this example a million times. But for anybody new, that nobody young understands what row, row, row your boat. So it has to be carried. That's a truth drop. So that concept via that nursery rhyme or that ancient saying or Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall always has to be refreshed. It has to be carried through time artificially by these minions and their systems, in this case, Hollywood, if that made any sense. Thanks for listening, guys.